because we're dealing with a very, very evil organization. Okay, these people are totally without any empathy or compassion. And the reason is because they have also been conditioned to be this way. They have been made into monsters from a very young age. And this is what all the satanic cult stuff is about. Because all of the quote elites, the human elites, which I'll just call the Illuminati for now, they have been conditioned into this Luciferian, pedophile, blood sacrifice cult from a very young age, and they've been intentionally turned into monsters. So we're dealing with a very evil criminal cartel that that rules the world, basically. This is who controls our governments, and they control our politicians. And the satanic cult stuff is a mechanism of control. Because if you are a satanic pedophile who has raped children, killed babies in satanic rituals, and drank their blood and all of this horrific stuff, if you've done that repeatedly and you've been conditioned into that lifestyle since you were a child, then you don't have anybody who would stand up for you and say, hey, this is a good person, don't burn them at the stake. I mean, if you're one of these satanic pedophiles who's been conditioned to be that way from a small child, basically, these people are pre-selected and they're conditioned. There's nobody that would stand with you. You're alone. The only people that you have are the other people in the satanic cult, and that's it. And the crimes that these people are guilty of are the most heinous crimes that can be committed on this planet, other than extinguishing the entire human race, maybe. But crimes against children are the most despicable, heinous crimes that exist. I don't think there's any crime more horrific and despicable than crimes against children. And so these people are utterly, utterly alone. And this is why they don't break rank and blow the whistle. And this is how they are controlled. And there's various levels of control. There are tier 1 politicians, like, for example, the Clintons and the Bushes, who are consciously aware of the satanic pedophilia and the cult. And they've been warped to the point where they are consciously participating in this. Then there are tier 2 politicians and figures in the halls of power, like probably Trump and Obama, Reagan, Carter I'm not so sure about. He might be a tier 1, I'm not sure. JFK probably was a tier 2. And so tier 2 people have also been conditioned from childhood. But the conditioning didn't take as well. Or maybe their genetics didn't allow them to be controlled as well as the tier 1 people. Because the elites are obsessed with bloodlines and genetic purity. So let me just explain why the elites are obsessed with bloodlines before I go further about the tier 1 and tier 2 politicians and CEOs and bankers and other figures in the world, because I think people need to know this and understand what it's really about. I've been looking into this for a long time in meditation and in research. And I believe basically what this whole bloodline thing boils down to is that the brainwashing techniques or the brainwashing technology that the controlling group has, whether the controlling group is alien or human or something else. The brainwashing mind control technology that they have is somehow dependent on the target human having certain genetic codes or certain genetic patterns in their genome. Otherwise, the mind control doesn't really work. And the genetic traits or codes that need to be present in order for the mind control to work seem to be recessive gene traits, which is why the elites are obsessed with genetic purity. And they do things like marry their first cousins and sometimes even marry their brothers and sisters. And there have been actually kingdoms in Europe that have fallen, or royal families in Europe that have fallen out of power at a certain point because the royal family became too inbred, and the king went insane basically and just completely lost it. When I'm talking about the brainwashing, the mind control that is taking place with the Illuminati, the human elites, I'm talking about a whole nother kind of brainwashing, a whole nother protocol of mind control than what I talked about earlier with these psych weapons or these radio frequency wave weapons that they have. The system of control, on the one hand, is fairly simple in the way that it works, but there are a lot of complexities. And so they don't have just one type of mind control. They don't have just one type of radio frequency weapon. They have lots and lots of different options out there for mind control and for all kinds of other things that are going on. Chemtrails are actually a good example of this multifaceted approach of the elites. The main purpose of the chemtrails is to reflect sunlight back into space and cool the planet to try to fight off global warming, because most of the material that they're releasing in the chemtrails are nano aluminum particles which reflect the sunlight back into space. And so whenever the lid officially gets blown off of chemtrails, they can say, well, it's not our fault. We were just trying to save the planet. You guys are the ones burning all the fossil fuels and heating the planet up. And we couldn't tell you because everybody would go crazy. And so we were just doing it for your own good, But of course, they won't mention the barium and the strontium and the other heavy metals that are in the chemtrails and what they're for. They're there basically to mess up the way that our neurology works, and to accelerate diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and to kind of make our brains turn into mush as we get older and as the heavy metals accumulate in our bodies and those levels of those toxins go up, so that by the time we're past our young and dumb phase of just running around having adventures and we get into our 40s, well, we're already stupefied from the heavy metal pollution and from the fluoride and whatever the hell else they put in our food and water and air. That's one facet of their plan. Another facet is to make cancer rates go up. And there's probably other facets that I could tune into if I sat here and thought about it for a few minutes and meditated. But all of their plans are multifaceted. And human beings tend to only look at things from a single-minded point of view, which is a mistake with the elites. Their programs of control are always multifaceted. They always keep a veil of plausible deniability over the whole operation so that they can get out of it later if the lid gets blown off. And the real controllers and manipulators of any operation are always at least 3 levels removed from the actual action of the operation. And so indirection and misdirection are key concepts to the way that they manipulate us. And I'm not a super genius or anything to be able to figure all of this out. I think my IQ is probably slightly above average, but that's about it. The reason why I can figure all this stuff out is because of intuition. Because I meditate, and meditation has made me super duper sensitive to discovering the truth. My truth radar has been activated and tuned by meditation. And so I don't really need to think and research for hours and days and weeks researching all possibilities and down every possible avenue to discover the truth. No, I'll just scan through all of the information available that's out there on a particular topic, and then my truth radar will immediately start picking out the bits and pieces of truth across the whole spectrum of information that's out there, and my intuition will just assemble it into the real story. And my little human brain doesn't really have to do any of the work, or almost none of the work. And then after my intuition has already figured it out in usually like 5 seconds, then my little human brain has to chug along slowly and verify the theory that my intuition came up with. So that's kind of how the researching process works when you're a meditator. And this is why I believe, personally, that humanity has got to start meditating if we are going to make it through this next phase of evolution. Otherwise, the elites will keep coming up with greater and greater dramas and tricks and traps, and will keep getting tricked. We'll keep getting fooled. The elites always do the opposite of whatever their publicly stated intent is. Always. And I'm not going to use any specific examples because then we'll get into politics and my personal opinions there, and that's not what this talk is about. But we've got to learn to see past the psychological manipulation that they dish out. And I don't want anybody to take my word for it. I don't want anybody to just listen to this talk and accept without question any of the theories that I'm proposing here. Humanity has deified and guruized and masterized and hero worshipped every possible religious and spiritual figure that we could come up with. And it hasn't helped us. Hero worship doesn't help us. And I'm not saying that the masters don't deserve to be respected. They certainly do. But I've communicated with all of the masters that I'm aware of, and even more that I'm not aware of the names of yet. I've communicated with all those guys already in meditation. I can tune into their frequency and have a chat with them anytime that I want to. And I can tell you that I haven't come across one master yet that wants to be called master. They don't want the hero worship. They want you to walk in their footsteps and figure it out for yourself. So as a species, we have got to drop the hero worship. We have got to drop it. And that's one of the reasons why I will never incarnate in the Hindu society again until it changes. Because I was hero worshipped when I was that Hindu yogi I mentioned. I was hero worshipped by the group of people around me in that life and called master and guru thousands and thousands of times. And it just continued until I just wanted to throw up. And I didn't deserve the title master in that lifetime, and I don't deserve the title master in this lifetime. And the hero worship that is inherent in societies like the Hindu society they absolutely turned me off. I only started looking into Hinduism and Hindu yogis several years ago. And when I was younger, I was never even remotely interested in that world. And when I would think about it, I would feel slightly nauseous. And I never knew why until I started to remember my past lives. And it's because the hero worship absolutely made me sick. I got so tired of it. But yet it's such an accepted norm in that culture, especially at the time when I incarnated in that body, that I wasn't allowed by my yogic tradition to refute it. I just had to accept it as a matter of course, because that was the tradition. So we've got to drop the hero worship, and we've got to go within and treat our own soul as our master. And so don't take my word for it on anything that I say in this talk. You go and sit down and meditate and do the hard work yourself and see your own interpretation of what you think's going on, which is just as valid as anything that I see. And we're going to see different things along the path, but when everybody gets advanced enough, we're going to come together, and all of the misunderstandings that we have in our subjective interpretations of the intuitive reality will all be, revealed, and we'll realize the truth of any misunderstandings that we have, and it'll all be okay in the end. And interim misunderstandings don't really matter, honestly. It's just part of the journey. There's no judgment. There's no need to judge others or yourself. Just laugh about it and move on. That's it. So anyway, back to the satanic cult stuff and how the elites are controlled. I think it's just advanced brainwashing techniques based on advanced technology that is dependent somehow on bloodlines and DNA traits. And there are a lot of conspiracy theories about demon possession and all this kind of stuff. And I don't believe any of that kind of stuff is true. The conspiracy theory about lower astral entities feeding off of our emotions or feeding off of our energy, reptilians being fourth dimensional beings that are feeding off of our energy and all of this nonsense, I don't believe that that's true. I think that is part of the original deception that was foisted upon humanity using advanced technology. And any technology that is sufficiently advanced seems like magic to a group that's not familiar with that technology yet. And so I don't see any solid evidence whatsoever about demons or astral entities or possession or any of this nonsense at all. I don't see it in meditation, and I don't see any evidence in the, quote, real world to corroborate that at all. It's all just fantasy and fairy tales as far as I'm concerned. And so anyway, back to the tier 1 and tier 2 people and what I would call the Illuminati, basically the human elites. The tier 2 people, I believe, after examining tier 2 people for years and years and trying to figure out what's going on with them, and examining the tier 1 people, and the Queen of England, Elizabeth Windsor, would be a good example of another tier 1 person. And so after years and years of examining these tier 1 and tier 2 people and trying to figure out what's going on with them, what makes them tick, how are they being manipulated exactly, are they being manipulated, the tier 2 people, I can say, don't seem to be conscious of the satanic pedophile cult. People are essentially, from a young age, given heavy psych drugs and then induced into this dreamlike state where everything seems like a dream. And then they go and participate in a satanic ritual and do all this horrible stuff, or see horrible things done in front of them, both ways. First, they see it done when they're young, and then when they get older, when they get into their teen years, then they begin to do those horrible things. And it seems like a dream to them. And they don't really think that it's real. And then when they come off of the drugs and they find themselves back in bed, they don't remember it. It just exists in their subconscious, basically. But they implant subconscious triggers in people during these rituals. And the subconscious triggers, if you research this a little bit on the internet, you can find psychiatrists and retired CIA agents and people of that sort talking about subconscious triggers and building different altars within people. And an altar is a personality. And so this is how they create multiple altars or multiple personalities in people, where there's a hidden personality that only comes out during satanic rituals when they're under the influence of these heavy psych drugs. And there is an exterior public personality that they were born with that operates the rest of the time. And so this is, a little bit about how these people are controlled. For example, there have been many witnesses that have come forward and have subsequently been ignored that have testified that George Bush Sr. Abused them in various ways in satanic rituals, which they fortunately survived. And they described his personality during those rituals as being completely and utterly different than his regular personality. They described him as being extremely violent and psychotic. And there have been a few witnesses come forth about the Clintons saying the same types of things. Many witnesses coming forth about royal family members behaving in these ways. In the English royal family in the UK. There is an organization that is called the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. Their website is itccs.org. O-R-G. They were established in 2010, and they are basically a group of retired judges and police detectives and lawyers who have banded together to try to both investigate and stop these horrific crimes by the Illuminati against children. And police organizations typically refuse to prosecute politicians that are very high-ranking, and also high-ranking church members, and also members of royal families. Those are the people that are above the law in their home country, at least. And so they founded this court, I believe, in Brussels, Belgium, on what's called common law, and what common law is a whole nother discussion. But basically, common law is the basis for all of our modern systems of law, and goes back to when King John signed the Magna Carta, I believe. So anyway, they had a trial that listed Elizabeth Windsor, Queen of England, and many prime ministers and past presidents of the UK and the US, and many bankers and CEOs, and listed the Pope at the time, not the current Pope, but the previous one, and many members, high-ranking members of the church. The list of defendants was long. It was 200 or 300 people long, and they were all elites. And the charges were that were levied against them were basically every crime that we have a law for. Every kind of heinous crime that we have a law for: child murder, sacrifice and satanic rituals, kidnapping, rape, sexual abuse, crimes against humanity, basically. These people are responsible for the deaths of, millions and millions of people worldwide over the last century or so. This is a very, very evil group with no empathy whatsoever for the common person. And they're also white supremacists because of the genetic purity bloodline stuff that they're obsessed with. And there's also Asian elite groups that are Asian supremacists too. So that's going on with the Chinese royal dragon families and so on. But anyway, they held an actual trial with a real judge and lawyers for both sides, and they argued the case for each defendant in court, and the trial lasted for a while, maybe a couple of years, I think. This was back in 2010 and 11, I believe, and the prosecution in the trial presented thousands of documents of signed testimony by witnesses, and hundreds of witnesses came from all over the world to testify as to what they had experienced, basically whistleblowers and survivors of all this abuse. And so end result was that every single defendant was convicted on all counts because the evidence was just massive and overwhelming. And so this is not some fairy tale that conspiracy theorists are inventing. This is real, okay? This is really going on. And it's being totally ignored by the mainstream media, which is controlled by the elites, being totally ignored by the government, which of course is controlled by the elites. And so, this is the reality of our world right now. And of course, since this court is not recognized officially by any government, their guilty verdicts are kind of meaningless from the standpoint of crime and punishment, but they are meaningful in that it was an actual trial that was held according to common law, which is very similar to court proceedings that we would be used to seeing in any court in any country in the modern world, in the first world. So it was all done very officially and very carefully, and the evidence was presented very meticulously, and everything was double and triple checked to make sure that the evidence was absolutely rock solid. And so from that standpoint, the trial was very significant to show people that this is real, that this is really going on, and that these elites are getting away with heinous crimes and nobody's doing anything about it. So anyway, back to the discussion of brainwashing and multiple alters / personalities and all of this, you can start to get an idea of what they can do to people and how people can be manipulated and controlled. And so during these episodes where they're under the influence of heavy psych drugs, subconscious triggers are implanted in them because they're in an altered state. And when they come down from the drugs, they don't remember what happened. And so these people can be induced into states of great fear or panic or great aggressiveness, and can then be used later on when they are elected president or elected to a a congressional seat, or maybe they're a CEO of a company, or something like this. And so these people can be manipulated by the puppet masters in various ways. I remember a past life where I was involved in the royal court of one of the first Norman kings of England. And we were taken down into the basement of a castle in England. And these guys in black robes came in and offered us a chalice filled with some strong smelling dark liquid that we were asked to drink. And this was an initiation ceremony. And the people that had come were from the Vatican. And we thought that they had come by horse, but there were no horses outside the castle. We didn't know how they got there. But this was part of the ritual. Before you were accepted by the Vatican, you had to go through this ritual. It was like a confirmation ritual, only for royals, only for members of royal families. And so I drank the liquid, and immediately I became extraordinarily high, and everything seemed like it was a dream. And then they took us down a secret chamber, or down a secret tunnel deep underground. And they took us to basically an underground high-speed railroad that ran to the Vatican and back, and probably other places in the world. And we had never seen a train. We had no idea that kind of technology existed. And we were just told that it was, it was a silvery color. The train was silver, I remember. And we were just told it was, the chariot of God or something, or the chariot of the underworld, or they gave us some kind of explanation like that. And we were really, really high, so we didn't really care anyway about the details. So they put us on this underground train, and we go to this giant base that I believe was originally an alien base underneath the Vatican, underneath Vatican City. And there we engaged in satanic rituals. And my sister Claudia, my youngest sister, was sacrificed and killed in that ritual. And I didn't actually drive the dagger into her heart, but I watched them do it. And I drank of her blood afterwards. And this is what they call the blood sacrament. And that's why the guys in the Vatican high up are all dressed in the blood red garb. If you're wearing that garb, then that is, I believe, signifying that you are qualified to lead one of these rituals. And so the Vatican is actually a satanic organization in secret. I don't want to say anything against Catholicism exactly, but in secret, this is the true nature of that organization. And so the Vatican requires that all members of a royal family participate in the blood sacrament ritual before the Vatican will confirm them and accept them in their position, basically, in their position of influence and power in the royal family. And so, in regard to the blood sacrament and my sister Claudia and all of the other children that have been sacrificed to hold this terrible ritual, when you've seen something so horrific done and you've drunk your own sister's blood afterwards, and you've experienced this horrific act in a state where you're euphoric and just high as a kite, then this creates a very severe emotional conflict in you. Because on the one hand, you're feeling absolutely fantastic, and everything, even including blood, tastes good when you're in that state. And on the other hand, you just saw your little sister die, and you're drinking her blood, and so this creates a huge rift emotionally, psychologically in a person. And this is how trauma-based mind control works. Because a person starts to fracture, their consciousness starts to fracture under this kind of pressure. And when I came down from the drugs and I couldn't remember anything, and Claudia was no longer there, they told me that the Lord God had found her too pure and had just taken her to heaven. She was too pure to remain on earth. And so this was a typical kind of satanic ritual that was done for each royal family back then in Europe, probably for almost every country in Europe. And a royal family member was always sacrificed, and the others had to drink of his or her blood, and usually the youngest was sacrificed. And her name was erased from all of the official records and the books. And it was like she never existed. But I believe they did put an inscription somewhere in the church and erected like an angel statue that was named Claudia or something. That was their way of saying, okay, this is what happened to her. And there's no other record of what happened to her other than that statue. And I don't remember where the statue is or anything. I'm not that advanced yet. But if I ever get to that point, I would go to England and try to find the church that has her statue in it to confirm this memory. So anyway, this is a little bit of information about what is actually going on in the halls of power in this world and how our human elites are being controlled. And so if you ask the question, because we're talking about brainwashing and all of this stuff, all right? And so if you ask the question, can a person be controlled like a puppet? The answer is no. They always have free will. It's always possible to resist any and all brainwashing and to break free. And it may be really, really hard, but a person cannot be controlled like a puppet. And the reason for this is actually very, very simple. The soul has a connection to this incarnate form, which creates a certain field of energy around the body that we call the aura. And the aura has an electromagnetic connection that wires it into the nervous system of the body, the physical body. And so if you want to take over a person's brain and body and control them like a puppet, then you have to project into their brain a signal strong enough to completely take over the field, the energy field, the electromagnetic field in their brain, and probably in their heart too, because the strongest electromagnetic field that's generated in the body is from the heart. And so as soon as you do that and completely take over their brain's field and the heart's field, what happens is that the signal from the soul is severed. And so when the signal from the soul is severed, then the body dies. So when the elite, the negative elite group that we have ruling the planet right now, when they've experimented with trying to completely control people in the past as puppets, what has happened is every time they reach the amplitude of energy in their signal that they're trying to use to hack the human brain and control people's behavior, every time they reach the amplitude that they need to completely override the brain's natural signal that it's operating it within itself, every time that happens, the person drops dead. It overrides the signal that the person is receiving from their soul, and it severs the connection from the soul, and the person drops dead.
Oh.
So for this reason, people cannot be controlled like puppets. And so this phenomenon is part of the divine design.
But, okay, so they can't be controlled, but they can be just offed that easily? They can just be killed?
Oh, sure, yeah. But the elites don't want to kill us. If they did, they would have killed us off long ago.
But if you're acting out of line, don't they want to kill you if you're trying to expose them or do something against their will, their agenda?
Well, here's where the rabbit hole goes really, really deep.
Let's dive in. What else do we got to live?
Here's where it goes really deep, boy. So you try to fit all these puzzle pieces together, all right?
Okay.
So in a nutshell, we are being managed like a human ant farm. The human elites that we know about, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and then their minions in the political realm, Clintons and Bushes, etc. They're all brainwashed into this satanic cult, and the overseer group that controls them are actually the ones who set the policies and determine how the game that they're playing with humanity, the game of control, is going to play out. And on the one hand, they manipulate and control the human elites in terrible ways with this satanic cult stuff. But on the other hand, they are very hands-off, and they kind of just let humanity decide on its own course in a way. And they just manipulate humanity directly when they need to at certain points in our history. Because they actually have the overseer group, which I haven't talked about, but I'll get into who they are in a minute. The overseer group has an entirely different agenda than what they are sharing with the human elites. The human elites don't actually know who they are, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And I shouldn't laugh, but it's like a dark comedy. But the overseer group that I'll just call the Annunaki for now, their agenda basically is just to manage the human ant farm for their masters. And I'll talk about who their masters are later. Basically the Nibiruans, the reptilian aliens everybody keeps talking about. I'll talk about them in a minute. And so they're just managing the human ant farm for their masters. And so if you're managing an ant farm, you don't want to shake up the ant farm too much. And so the Anunnaki don't care about the satanic cult and what exactly they're doing. They don't care about what goes on in human society, really. They don't care about the particulars and the details of what goes on in human society, as long as the overall agenda and purpose of the human ant farm is being served. And so this is why they try not to assassinate people too often, or they only assassinate people when it's not going to create too much of a ripple in the human pond. The human pond is kind of like the collective subconscious of humanity, which they are, of course, aware of. And So they usually try to choose to manipulate someone rather than just offing them, because they're master manipulators and they find it amusing and kind of hilarious and fun. It's kind of like a dark comedy to them. We're like cattle to them. You know, they treat us with about as much compassion and caring as we treat farm animals in concentrated animal feeding operations, or whatever they're called. If you go into a chicken house or a hog farm, or into a dairy barn or anything like that sometime, we are just using those animals with pretty much almost no concern for their quality of life, their emotional or psychological state. The people who are in those industries have become callous to all of that. They've become numb to all of that, and they are pressured by their own industry to follow certain practices in their business. And so animal welfare is only cared about to the point that it makes a difference to their bottom line. And that's exactly how the Anunnaki treat us. They don't care about us. They don't care if we're happy. They don't care if we're sad. They don't care if we die in screaming horrible pain. It's just like gutting a pig, same thing. So what goes around comes around, and I'm not vegan, by the way, but I do believe in treating animals very well. I used to raise chickens and turkeys, and I used to slaughter them and eat them myself and so on. And I tried to maintain a balanced flock, and I tried to give everybody a good life, and I tried to feed them a healthiest food as possible, and I sprouted all kinds of stuff for them. And so this is part of the natural cycle of life. So I'm not necessarily against killing for food, because this is how it is in nature, But the way that we treat farm animals, at least when we're just raising them for food, is very, very far away from how predation works in nature. And so, basically, we are reaping what we've sown. And this has been going on for thousands of years with the Anunnaki and the human society. So anyway, the Anunnaki find it far easier to just manipulate human beings than to try to rule through absolute violence and tyranny. Because when a human being, let's say a particular person, is saying a bunch of crazy stuff like I am in this interview, for example, most people in society are going to ignore this type of information. They're not going to take it seriously. But if a person like me is killed, then more people will notice. They'll kind of sit up and notice, and they'll say, wow, hey, wait a minute. This person died. Why did that happen? Maybe there was something to what they were saying. And this is kind of an instinctual thing. The Anunnaki view human beings like animals, and so they study us. We have been studied just like we have studied animals. And so they realize that when there's a death in the human population, and it did not occur naturally, that creates this ripple through the human collective subconscious. And it hits a lot of people at a deep emotional level when somebody dies. And the Anunnaki are not really in physical danger from us, but it's possible that they could be in physical danger from us if all of us woke up and we became massively, massively enraged. Because human emotion is extremely powerful. It's far more powerful than human thought. When mothers have lifted cars off of their children after an accident, that huge amount of adrenaline the adrenaline rush that is generating that huge burst of strength, that comes from emotion. And so, some of the feats that we see in old movies, where warriors, whether they're men or women, are accomplishing these incredible physical feats, like walking hundreds of miles without rest, and being grievously wounded, and still able to fight, and all this kind of stuff. All of these abilities are created by human emotion. And so when human beings are extremely emotional and extremely enraged and saddened at a very, very deep level, that's when we're at our most dangerous. And we become very, very dangerous. And so you don't want the ants to become so enraged with you that they revolt in a consistent, sustained manner. And, human beings have the potential to revolt and become enraged to the point where we're almost an unstoppable force. And the only way that you could stop us is if you killed off 80-90% of the human population. And if the Anunnaki had to do that, their masters, the Nibiruans, would be extremely pissed, because that would mess up their whole human ant farm, and they don't want to do that. They do not want to do that. They want to maintain the integrity of the experiment that they're running with humanity, basically. And so they've discovered that the best way to do that is to just mostly leave us alone, and to manipulate a human elite group that rules us and controls the governments and controls the banks and controls most of the big companies and so on. But the human elite actually are mostly left alone by the Anunnaki, and how exactly they rule the rest of us, the commoners, from their point of view, is really just up to them. They're given certain rules and certain boundaries, but within those boundaries, they pretty much can have the freedom to do whatever they want to do. And this is why the system works. If the Anunnaki tried to tightly control the human elites, then it wouldn't work. And there have been revolts within the human elites in the past, but that's when the Anunnaki come in and they exterminate that subgroup. And they try to do so in a deceptive way, so it seems like they've befallen some kind of accident or divine wrath that fits within the fake Luciferian pedophile religion that the elites are being fed. And I'll talk more about that later. But anyway, so this is why they mostly just leave us alone, And they do definitely assassinate people sometimes, but they definitely try not to do that, and they don't kill off everybody that goes against the system. They always try to manipulate first. Because for them, if someone is going against the system, they are expressing ideas and opinions that are present in the human collective subconscious. And they're, of course, aware of the phenomenon of intuition. And they've actually been studying spiritual powers of monks and yogis for hundreds of thousands of years, actually. Very, very few people achieve true power, such as bilocation, levitation, and all this stuff. Those powers are possible. Very few people achieve them. And so the Nibiruans and their minions, the Anunnaki, have been studying these kinds of powers in humanity for a long, long time. They haven't been able to figure it out. They haven't been able to crack the code. But this curiosity on their part is the source of all of these super psychic, super soldier programs that the government is running. And so anyway, if you read books by authors like Niccolo Machiavelli, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he was an Italian diplomat and is considered to be like the father of political science, I believe. something like that. If you read authors like him, he wrote a book called The Art of War, a book called The Prince. There's another author that was one of his contemporaries, I believe, I can't remember the name of. And so those types of books are kind of like the Illuminati handbook for how they manipulate humanity. And if you start reading into all of this stuff, Illuminati philosophy, and I think it's called Rosicrucian philosophy, if I'm pronouncing that right, Knights Templar stuff, there's all these different branches and permutations and varieties of Illuminati groups that have come and gone over the centuries, and their philosophy kind of keeps developing over a period of time, and it all gets very complex. But to sum it all up, what all of that stuff is it is a way to manipulate humanity in increasingly subtle ways to get what they want, to accomplish their, quote, great works, as they call them. And along with that, they have all of these fantasies about powers and accomplishments that they can achieve themselves. And the fantasies are part of their religion, having to do with, their demonic lords, which are the Annunaki, and they don't even know who their demonic lords are. That's how deluded these people are. They think that they're real demons. I shouldn't laugh, but they are manipulating us like we're children. The human elites, the Illuminati, get manipulated like they're children. They get fooled. And then we get fooled, the quote, normal people, the peasants of the world, or they call us plebeians or plebs, which is the old Roman word for commoner. And if you look on the social media posts of the heirs and heiresses of the world, they use this word plebs to refer to us. And so this is yet another sign that these elite ruling royal families have been around since Roman times. The same 13 royal families that ruled ancient Rome still rule today. And so there's that number 13 again. And so anyway, the Illuminati is fooling the plebs just like the Anunnaki are fooling the Illuminati. I haven't talked about who the Anunnaki are and what the difference between them and the Nibiruans is. And I'll talk about this a little later, but essentially the Anunnaki are hybrid beings, hybrid reptilian beings that the Nibiruans have created through genetic engineering to rule over us during the Nibiruans' absence, because they're only here for a little while every 3,600 years. And so the Anunnaki are hybrid beings that have a 3,600-year lifespan according to their genetic coding. And they are the actual controllers of the human elites, the Illuminati. Okay. And the Anunnaki actually are also being fooled by the Nibiruans. Because the Anunnaki think that when the Nibiruans come back in 3,600 years, that they're going to be elevated into full membership in the Nibiruan society and become immortal like the Nibiruans, because they think that the Nibiruans are immortal. And this is a total lie. The Anunnaki are taken aboard the mothership when it visits, and they're placed in chambers that they're told are immortality chambers. And basically they're just, vaporized into goo, and their genetic material is recycled. So they're just killed off, and then the new batch of Anunnaki hybrids are installed on Earth to rule for the next 3,600 years. That's basically how it works. It's all a deception. Yeah. And I kind of feel bad about laughing, because this is such a huge tragedy that's occurred on Earth for A long time. The Nibiruans have been interacting with humanity for a long, long time. They've been interacting off and on with this planet for millions of years, and there's been various wars and battles, and I don't know the whole history of all that because I haven't meditated on it enough. But, this whole thing is like it's like a dark comedy that somebody in an insane asylum invented. And when you meditate enough, you can achieve samadhi or nirvana, which is the frequency of home, which is the frequency of where we go when we die. And then you can have a higher perspective and laugh about all of this. Because I think that's really the only way to survive it is if you can maintain your sense of humor and transcend this madness of suffering and this ridiculous dark comedy that we're living here on the earth. My best friend Stuart, who was I would describe as a star seed or a star being, he unfortunately passed away back in 2013. But he used to call Earth the insane asylum of the universe. And I don't really agree with him, but I see his point. I definitely see his point. Okay, so anyway, back to the Nibiruans. This is how the Nibiruan reptilian consciousness works. They never tell the truth. They always lie 100% of the time. In the Nibiruan society, within the Nibiruan society itself, different families of Nibiruans don't tell each other the truth. It's like a competition. In their own minds, if you are totally honest with another Nibiruan who's not a direct family member, it's like rolling over on your stomach and exposing your weak point. It's like you're asking for it if you tell the truth. This is how they view honesty. Honesty is like a fatal flaw in their society. Everything is based on deception and competition and reading between the lines and trying to outmaneuver each other. But within the Nibiruan family unit, the truth is always told. And if you lie to a family member, that is a grave offense. And if you repeatedly lie, then you can even be killed by your own family. And so in human society, I would say love is the most powerful thing. In reptilian society, in the Nibiruan reptilian society, honesty is the most important thing. That's the thing that their society is measured by. And they're never honest outside of their immediate family unit. And this kind of mindset that is based on deception has been passed down from the Nibiruans to the Annunaki, and from the Annunaki to the human elites, the Illuminati. And so if you want to understand how we're being manipulated, if you want to achieve an overview, an accurate overview of how the Illuminati manipulate us, one of the first things you have to realize is that they never tell the truth. Or if you catch them telling the truth, then it's a cover for something else. It's a cover for a deeper untruth, a deeper lie, to manipulate you into something else. So they tell shallow truths all the time, because if they told shallow lies all the time, well, then the jig would be up, because we're not that stupid. We would figure it out. So these deceptions that they use are multi-layered deceptions with both truth and lies interspersed in each layer of the deception. And there are multiple layers in their system of control, multiple elite layers in the Illuminati. And what's really funny is that each layer in the elite pyramid of control, with the Annunaki at the top, each layer has its own version of a fairy tale that it believes in, that it's been fed by the higher layers, and that fairy tale is used to manipulate them. And each layer of elites thinks that they know the true story, the true version of events, and they think that part of the truth that is like a higher level knowledge that they're not initiated into yet is being kept from them. But they believe that the facts and tenets of their satanic religion that they're told are the truth, when in reality the whole thing is a sham from the beginning. And so each layer in the elite pyramid has a different version of the scam, basically, that they're being told, that they're being fed. And so everybody thinks that they're fooling everybody else, or everybody in a higher layer of the pyramid thinks that they're fooling all of the lower layers, and they're kind of chuckling and laughing about it, but they don't realize that they are being fooled as well. And the Anunnaki don't realize that they're being fooled. And so it's hard for me to verbalize a name for this whole philosophy of control, but the Nibiruans are extremely intelligent, and they have figured out that one of the best ways to control a group of beings in a hands-off manner is you have to tell them a magnificent lie from the beginning that is a fantasy that they want to believe in for their own selfish reasons. And you layer the fantasy with truth. And this is exactly how the modern Christian Bible, for example, is constructed. If you read many verses in the modern Christian Bible, or if you read many verses in, for example, the ancient Sumerian religion, I was reading verses from the Bible and then comparing them to some of the verses in the ancient Sumerian religion that dates back to 3500 BC or so. And I suddenly realized that there was an inherent pattern of psychological and emotional manipulation inherent in every verse of those religious texts. My intuition was telling me that these scriptures were actually written by beings of higher intelligence that were masterfully creating a brainwashing tool of psychological and emotional manipulation through these scriptures. And if you read those kinds of scriptures carefully, you can spot so many different emotional and subconscious triggers that are aimed at manipulating us like little monkeys, basically. I mean, it's a work of genius, really. It was obviously composed by a being of higher intelligence that is playing with us. That's the impression that I got from him. So anyway, many people have asked the question, why did the Nibiruans direct the Anunnaki to form this satanic cult by which to control the Illuminati, the human elites? And so the reason why the Anunnaki chose satanic pedophilia as a form of control is simply because when they reasserted their control over humanity during the fall from the Age of Light, which I believe happened somewhere loosely around 5,000, 4,000 BC, according to the 26,000 year cycle of the precession of the equinoxes. So according to that cycle, 5,000, 4,000 BC time frame, we would be in what the Hindu called the descending Dwapara Yuga. We're descending through the Dwapara Yuga into the Kali Yuga, which is the Dark Age. And you can look up all these terms on Google and it'll explain the cycles and so on. And I'll put it on my blog later because there's a lot of confusion about cycles of time. So I'll put my interpretation on my blog later. Basically, when they reasserted their control over humanity during the fall of consciousness, they sought out the strongest, most warlike tribe of human beings with the characteristics that they wanted, which was violent tribe that likes to fight, that is susceptible to negative influences. And they found a tribe, which I believe we now call the Kazakians, that existed in the Caucasus mountain range, which I believe is somewhere around Turkey in that area of the world. But that tribe was engaged in a blood sacrifice religion, a blood sacrifice belief system at that time. Okay. They were sacrificing children, killing babies, drinking their blood, that kind of stuff, to appease the gods, all that nonsense. So the controlling group of beings, whether they be human or alien, did not force us to do that. We were doing it on our own at that time. And so the controlling group of beings infiltrated that religion. And using advanced technology, they posed as something like demon lords or satanic lord-like figures. And they started to manipulate humanity once again from there. And so that is the start of the current satanic pedophile elite power structure, which has been influencing and ruling the world pretty much since then. So that's what I see in meditation, right or wrong.
Okay.
And so the question is, who are these controlling group of beings?